time box writing a spec, time box for shipping, and then cut the scope down to fit in the box, right? It's the only way, it's the only thing that works. The thing that's stuck in here is kind of build the hardest thing first. When we sit down to work on a project, there's a natural tendency to go, here are all the things I know how to do, so I will do them first. And building that FTL drive, don't really know how to do that, I will leave that till last. And that's going to make your project slip by like 17 years. So try doing that first, and that kind of gives you a feeling of whether it's actually possible. Whatever you build, the goal is to keep iterating, small cycle times, small things, ship frequently, it gets better. A word for people who are being asked by their bosses, how long will this take? The answer is, I don't know, I can't tell you. No, I cannot build it by Thursday. Super important skill. Oh, and the other thing to add to that, which is another slide, which is, no is a complete sentence. No because, no. There's no reason. Because if you give people reasons, they can argue with you. Alright, so, I want to talk about never done this. So typically in technical people, there's kind of a continuum, but they tend to fall in sort of two buckets, right? There are purists. Put up your hand if you're a purist. You want things to be done right. Put up your hand if you're a pragmatist. You want it to be done kind of soon. And you need both kinds of people on a team, right? Because if you have nothing but purists, you will never ship. And if you have nothing but pragmatists, you will ship a lot of shit. Right? You need both kinds because they kind of balance each other out. But there is a problem with people who want to ship like the perfect thing, right? So what you are aiming for with people like that is to fight a sense of macro perfectionism. I will build the perfect architecture, I will stub it all out, and will, blah, blah, blah. What you're aiming for is micro quality. Build a very good component. You can make this perfect because it's that small, and really, even if it's perfect, it can probably only take 3 weeks. And build another component in the next iteration, right? Like you're looking for good quality code with tests in small increments. Okay. On that too, scope creep is your enemy. People say, can it just? No. Not no because, just no. Not in this iteration. It's like a softer version of no. That's like not now, later. So, okay. So why do you need short cycle times? The only way to get better at shipping is to ship a lot, right? It's like any other skill. If you play golf once a week, you're never going to be that great at golf. If you play golf every day of your life, you can be Tiger Woods, right? It's that simple. So ship a lot. The other thing is too, the time for production is reduced, right? Like little things going out frequently makes everybody happy. The time to improve something is reduced. Things that are blocked, not blocked for so long. And actually the nice thing is this really helps fight perfectionism. Because you're like, I just can't ship what's perfect. What should we have now? We can make it perfect next week, right? Like we can take one more step towards perfection, another. So, emergent process. So this is kind of interesting. Everybody, I think most people now understand this idea of like iterating on a product and short cycle times. It's the cool thing, everybody knows about lean. Do you know about emergent process? So, what if I told you that it is as important to iterate on your process the same way you do on a product, with short cycle times just like you do on a product, right? So let's say you are doing something that's not working for people. It's the way you run your team meeting, or the way that you do bug triage, or the way that you design a system. Don't say, next time we'll do this better, so fix it now, fix it today. When you're in those situations, especially if you have a situation where the team's like everything sucks, and all of our tools are awful, and all of our processes suck. And the question is, what can you fix on that today, right? The other thing I think I've found really useful in that particular thing is to get people to make a constructed list of what they would do, and then get them to go and do it, right? Give them time to do it. So, but start with what you can fix today before you go home for the day. You'll feel better, you'll sleep better. And then use the dividends from those little improvements to pay to the big things. This is like the opposite of technical debt, this is technical investment. But it's just like your code. Don't aim to build the perfect process and org chart on the first day of your company. You're allowed to iterate. You can change something every day. If you do something that doesn't work, you can change it again tomorrow. Okay. So the last section of the talk is about why have managers at all. Managers suck. We're the people that make people do stuff that they don't want to do. I'm the one that pushes the HR violation button, whatever it is. So we're going to have a company and we're not going to have any managers. So let me tell you this. It's not going to work because you might not have anyone whose job title is manager, but somebody who's going to emerge as a natural leader, right? It might be the company founders, it might be the people who know the most, it might be managers who have managers. If you think about an open source project, nobody hired a manager, right? Somebody became an expert, and leaders emerged. Let me tell you, there's it's funny how many really old references they have, it's kind of funny. There's a feminist paper that was written in the 1970s called The Tyranny of Structurelessness. And some of you tuned out when I said feminist paper, but let me put it in context. 60s and 70s, people were like, we will live in communes and we won't oppress each other, and we will have no structures, and we will all be equal, right? And this was the basis of this paper. Guess what happens when you do that? You have cliques and people are all like backstabbing the hell out of each other. So we know this, we've known this for years. So saying we're going to be completely structureless, like please just read something. You will have a structure, it will be emergent, but it will be there. You will have a hidden power structure, which isn't necessarily better. One of the reasons to have nominated leaders is the most important job of a leader is to like guide and protect and do whatever they can to make their emergent culture awesome, right? Make it constructive. So, if you're kind of having trouble getting ahead about this, think about any mailing list that you've ever been on, or a web discussion forum, or an open source project, and think about the conversations out there. There are people who have more power than others, right? Like people whose words are respected, people who control the conversation. This is what I'm talking about. So, if we accept that yes, there are going to be people who are leaders, what should be their jobs? What should a manager do if I'm not assigning 27 tickets to somebody every day and like micromanaging them, making them do status checks and all that kind of stuff? What should I be doing? Well, top one is recruitment, right? Hiring good people. Support transit and guide culture. Mentor people, help them be better, help them be more autonomous, help them be more senior. This kind of prioritization and big picture are really intertwinkled. Because sometimes as a manager, you probably go to like more meetings or talk to more people and have an idea of like what might be more important. So someone's like, I don't know whether to work on this or that. What do you think? You can say, well, I know that someone wants that. The other thing you can do is the things that nobody else wants to do, right? The paperwork, the ugly meetings, the occasional politics, that stuff. If you are not familiar with it, there is a thing called servant leadership. And the model of servant leadership says the manager is a servant of the people that they manage, right? They are humble, their whole job is to enable people. And enabling is more important than doing. You engineering managers have a lot of trouble with this, like stopping doing it themselves and telling people, you're doing it wrong, let me just show you how to do this, okay? Enabling is more important. I will say, however, don't stop coding, and I'll talk about why in a minute. One thing that's kind of interesting about servant leadership is there are a lot of people out there who are like introverts. Guess what? We're engineers, there are a lot of introverts in the room. This kind of model of leadership is really, really good if you're an introvert. So what are introverts good at? Introverts are good at talking to people one-on-one, and usually pretty good at empathy. So this is actually a really good model. If you have ever thought, I can never be a manager because I'm too introverted, you should think about like maybe modeling yourself along these lines. So that 10 traits of a servant leader or whatever, I look at these and it's what kind of stuff I'm talking about, like listening, empathy and healing, right? You are there to listen, you are there to provide empathy, you are there to trust, you're there to be a sounding board. Awareness is like situational awareness, you need to know what's going on through the place, that's one of your jobs. Persuasion occasionally, I try not to use that one too much. Conceptualization is big picture, foresight is vision. Stewardship, growing people, building community. It's really funny because most people at companies don't think about building community, but it's so important. Okay, I said something else people disagree with, which was if you're a manager, don't stop coding. So enabling is a lot more important than coding, right? Like the bulk of your time should be spent enabling if you're a developer manager. If you're an operational manager, same thing. You should spend most of your time enabling people. But if you don't do anything technical, you tend to like lose touch, right? And then you stop understanding when things are hard, and you mutter like the worst words any manager can ever say, right? This should be easy. I try to like slap myself in the face every time I do that. I still do it, even though I know it's evil, it just like pops right out. Okay, the other thing is too, nobody in this time is at their job for 30 years, and if you stop coding, you will then go to an interview at a different company and they'll do technical interviews and you'll be like, I have no idea what you're talking about. So, keep coding. Just don't do stuff on the critical path. You should never be blocking anybody, right? You need to do things that are off the critical path. So, things everyone's like, oh, I always wish we had like a bug dashboard. That'd be a great thing to work on. Side projects, little bash scripts that hold things together. Those are good projects for you to work on, right? So, I'll talk a little bit. One thing I think is really important in terms of mentorship is having one-to-ones with people. A lot of managers don't do it. I think they're really important because it builds trust, right? Builds a relationship. It's okay to talk about stuff outside of work because those are the trust-building things. What are you working on? What's in the way? What can I do to help? That's basically 3 questions, and then shut up. It's really hard for me to shut up. I'm not an introvert, so you may have guessed this by now. What else? So if you are in a large or bureaucratic company and you're thinking, how can I be more like disruptive inside my team and be motivated? One of your other jobs as manager is an umbrella, right? To keep bureaucracy from raining upon engineers, that's a really important job. Okay. So here's another one. Another important role of managers is marketing. I'm an engineering manager. Why do I have to market? Ask yourself, why am I standing on the stage right now? It's because I like talking to people and because Mike asked me to come down. But the other reason I'm standing here on the stage is that I hope that you're going to go away from this and say, that sounds like a cool place to work. I want you to think this is going to be a great team to work on. If you're doing consulting stuff, I might be thinking, I'd love to have these people work on my stuff because they're really innovative or whatever. Think about this, there's probably some company in the Valley that you don't work at that you think is cool, right? So I've named some companies I know people think are cool. People think GitHub is cool. Some people think Facebook is cool. Some people think Etsy is cool. Whatever it is, right? Like there's some company you're like, I really like how they do stuff. So one thing is you think maybe someday I would like to work there. But also if they announce a new project, probably use it, right? It actually makes their product more compelling. Isn't that interesting? So the other thing about this kind of marketing visibility raising is it raises morale of the team because people are proud to work on a team that other people want to work on. It's one thing. It strengthens the tribal identity of the team, which is super important for morale. And it helps build your culture, right? What's the culture of my team? We shit, and we have a lot of autonomy. That's what you should know. Also, as a manager, you're a mentor. You need to challenge people enough. I think that managers usually err on the side of not asking people to do hard enough stuff. Like, don't underestimate people, and particularly the autonomy. Like, you don't really probably need to tell somebody what to do. They can figure it out most of the time, unless they're like an intern, and hopefully by week 3 they've figured it out. You've got to help them figure out where they want to go in their career, right? There was an article that Reid Hoffman wrote that came out last week saying most people are not going to work at one company forever, and the good people on your team are going to leave one day. And part of your job is helping them find the next or something. And I really believe that, right? This is both for good performance and bad performance. When you realize that someone is reaching the point where they're looking at something else, then part of your job is to help them figure out what, and whether it's something inside your company or at some other company. Last thing on the list is to help people when they stumble. I'm actually going to skip slides because I have these in the wrong order. I noticed that earlier. So on stumbles, by stumbles I mean poor performance, right? So it's kind of an interesting thing. If we have this trust thing and assume nobody comes to work to a bad job, I think like true incompetence, if you have a decent hiring process, is fairly rare. What you're more likely to see is someone who has been doing fine and they stop doing fine. Right? That's the common case. So the first thing is, you should never surprise anybody with this. Like, when you have the conversation with them, it should be as soon as possible after they stop being fine. It's a little harder when people are autonomous, right? Like, you have to pay attention. Without seeming like you're paying attention, that can be kind of the trick. Feedback should be instant and explicit. So I had a conversation with 2 people on my team today. I was at a conference. They went to a planning meeting, and somebody came me up and was like, this guy, he said this thing that's driving me crazy. I'm like, did you tell him? No. Okay, so go talk to him right now and tell him that he annoyed the hell out of you and why, and tell him to do it again. Oh, all right. The other guy comes there and she's like, oh, we had this great conversation, so that's good. It's actually, the thing is too, we've all been in a situation where you know you have to have an awkward conversation with someone, right? And what's the natural tendency? You put it off, right? Unpleasant tasks. We procrastinate on them. And like many other unpleasant tasks, the longer you leave this, the worse it's going to be. If you say you did something today that annoyed me, no one's going to be really offended. If you leave it for a year and then say you have sucked for the last year, that's going to be the worst conversation you've ever had with that person. Don't do it. And this is really rewarding, right? Like once you start doing instant feedback, it's like almost addictive because you're like, I never have to have one of those really horrible conversations again. Okay, so why do people start falling off a cliff? Boredom is one, not challenged enough. Burnout is another, work too hard for too long. Depression, I have observed an interesting phenomenon. I encourage you to go to GitHub and pick the open source project with a decent amount of traffic that you like and look at commits over a year and you will see that productivity drops off in the winter. So not everybody has seasonal depression, but everybody has a dip, right? Pretty much overall we dip. People get depressed, developers get depressed a lot. Maybe they're having a life event, they had a baby, or they're sick, or their spouse is sick. You know, there's often something, right? And you need to figure out what it is and help fix it. The other one there is sometimes people are cruisers. I don't think it happens at sort of really good technology companies, but it does happen at kind of some places where some of your later focus, you were always the smartest kid in school and you never had to work very hard, right? Like you didn't do your homework because you didn't need to do your homework, you could just kind of turn up to a final and get 100% and it was just easy. And you went and worked at some job, I don't know, like Computer Sciences Corporation or IBM, sorry, no I shouldn't say IBM, IBM's lovely. Some other terrible company, the government or a bank or something. And they didn't work very hard because they just kind of cruised along and nobody ever asked very much of them. And then they come to work at your company and it's hard and they have no tools to address that, right? Or you put somebody's been on a project for a long time, put them on a different project and they just stop coping. So all of these things are things that you can address, right? And I think that you can help fix it. You have to be a manager psychologist and drive people to get help. But the other thing is, if someone is unhappy and is not fixable, then you need to help them find something else, right? And there can be an explicit conversation about like, I'll tell you one thing, nobody who's doing a bad job is happy, right? Nobody comes and sits at work and is like, I don't know how to do this and I'm so burned out, but I love my job. They're thinking about leaving, right? So when you come and say, I don't think you're very happy, would you be happier doing something else? What kind of thing would you be happier doing? Help them figure out what kind of job would be good for them. Maybe it's something else internal, maybe it's a different company. Maybe you can help them figure out what that company is, maybe you can introduce them to somebody at that company. And this is like not what I think was honestly the very rare cases of pure incompetence or malice, and those you can just fire people for, right? But this is for people all up. Okay, so off the depressing stuff. Another technique I really like for mentorship is that I try not to answer questions. It's actually really funny. So back maybe last week, in the next quarter, should I spend more time working on this sort of stuff or this sort of stuff? What do you think is more important? Right? He laughed because he's kind of getting the idea now. He's been working for me for about 2 months and I think he just figured it out. His previous manager was a micromanager, so he's kind of navigating it. But yeah, usually you can ask people, it's like you play yoga, you ask people a series of questions to help them figure it out for themselves. Some people call this the Socratic method, some people call it the Confucian method. The rabbinical method, if you're a rabbi, you're probably familiar with this, it's not asking questions. If someone says, how do I approach this? And you say, let me tell you a story. And you tell them a story, and it's probably not about like a man who had 3 goats and a daughter or something. It's probably about like one time when I was working at this place, I faced something like this. And then shut up and let them talk at you and be the rubber duck wall. So if you don't know what I mean, like rubber ducking is like, talking to somebody just to say things because it's useful to think out loud. Okay. So last thing, takeaway thing. I've talked about a ton of stuff. One thing that if you think that's kind of too much to absorb, there's a book by Dan Pink called Drive, which talks about what makes people happy at work. And there's basically 3 things. Paying people more doesn't make them happy, right? If you pay them enough, there's like an enough amount, and above that, like incremental raises make 0 difference. They have to feel like it's fair and it has to be enough. Beyond that, money's irrelevant. Benefits are irrelevant, perks are irrelevant. All of those things, and people know that, right? And they're like, we have a foosball table, and you're like, no, I'm not coming to work here for a foosball table. The 3 things that people want out of a job. They want to be given the opportunity to get good at stuff, right? They want to be able to grow professionally. If I'm learning new things about being an engineer, then I'm probably pretty happy. Autonomy. I have to have the freedom to work on things that I think are important in the way that I like to work. And purpose, feeling like I'm working on something important, right? Something that's going to make a difference at this company or working at a company that's going to make a difference in the world, right? Those are the things. So 3 things, mastery, autonomy, and purpose. That's everything I have to say. Thank you, and then I'll answer questions if there are any questions.
Yeah, hi Laura. It's great you presented this, but the one thing I was looking for, I guess, in commercial companies, somebody else is promising something to customers way before you even got the problem.
Yeah, for sure.
So then, given that constraint, how do you operate open source, open dev, that kind of culture within that space?
That's a great question. I will tell you that before I was at Mozilla, I was a consultant and product person for like 10 years, so I've worked in an environment. And I think that it depends on whether you're talking about product or consulting, I think, but I'll talk about product first. One of the key things I think is not to think of it as a unidirectional pipeline, right? You want to try and structure your company so that it's not the product person comes up with what we're going to build and then engineers build it. Like that is a toxic pattern right there, it's an anti-pattern. So you want to try and fix that. And the way to fix it is when you are studying product planning, bring the engineers in and have conversations with them. And sometimes people will tell you, well, we can't do that because there's like a technical issue. You're asking me to build a faster than light drive, but we could do this instead, right? So that's probably the first thing. And yeah, that's probably the main thing actually. It's the biggest thing. Get people involved early. Don't treat them as like task rabbits that will deliver code to you.
So I was wondering if you could say a little bit about when you're first starting a project. Like, obviously, at some point you have to decompose it in some shape or form. And so, how do you go about like assigning their tasks or modules to certain people and like keeping that emergent culture?
Okay, so the typical model for that, and I do this a lot. My team works on a lot of different projects, like a horrific fashion. So. The approach that I use is that we try to figure out what the parts are, either collaboratively or the person who is going to lead the project, if they're enthusiastic about it, we'll figure that out. And we come up with a list of components or tasks and then say who wants to do what. And you know that if you don't volunteer for something, you need to assign something. So that's kind of like something that's interesting to you. And then the boring parts will kind of, split them up. It may seem like a strange way to do it, but people choose what they're going to work on much happier, and it's just not that hard to do that, generally speaking.
Hi Laura, and thanks for the talk. A lot of what you described was about building a team, an organization, a company. Now I work at a big company, like really big. Could very well be on the slide with Microsoft, Google, and the others. And our culture is sort of different. We probably have every single problem that you listed.
That's all right. They're in the slide deck for a reason, right?
And are there any examples where like you could actually turn a company, an entire company around and change the culture?
That's a good question. It depends how big the company is. Like, if it is truly one of the behemoths, I'm not sure you can make a difference in the whole company, but you can certainly make a difference in your group, right? The other thing is too, if you can make a difference in your own team, if it's successful, which I hope that it would be, then other people start to copy you, right? It's very viral. And a lot of those things that come from the grassroots up can be very successful. It takes a long time, and I think a lot of people that I've met have no idea how you work, right? So just do it and tell them about it if they ask. They probably won't ask. It's terrible. Like, be subversive. Subversive is good. Subversion and whimsy, two most important traits.
I'm uncomfortable with some of the agile MVP sort of things.
Okay.
And I felt like we came down on both sides, which seems like the right course for every these things black and white. I guess a couple of things you talked about. You talked about quality and rapid iteration. And one of my beliefs is that you can't really iterate quality into a product. You need to start with quality design. And I've been uncomfortable with this concept of, and another example would be your concept of doing the hardest thing first, and yet also rapidly prototyping to a minimum viable product, which maybe doesn't include the hard things.
Oh, so right? I think that you should MVP the hard thing first.
Okay.
That's the first step.
Okay,
right?
no, I'm with you 100%.
Yeah.
It feels like a lot of people who pursue agile methodologies are kind of encouraged to produce something pretty first, right?
Yeah,
so that everybody, right? So you have a beautiful user interface, but you haven't done any of the hard parts.
You're pitching that to the wrong person because I work on tools. Nothing we make is pretty. It was all clearly made by engineers, but it works really well. So that's kind of the trade-off. So yeah, the advantage of doing some UI stuff first is the user testing, right? Like that's where it comes in handy. And if you are not sure user interface, what's going to be most effective, then that's certainly a decent way to go. You can also do things in parallel, right? Like, and probably the people who are doing the hardest thing are possibly not doing the UI. So you can maybe also do those things in parallel as well. I do think it's good to kind of figure out like what the initial components are. If you aim for to have good interfaces between your components, that's where your quality comes in, because you can always like improve the quality of each individual component. But making sure the interfaces are right is the part that I think needs to be done up front. So, I hope that helps. I'll tell you too, like, I sort of laugh at Agile. I laugh at everything. I don't ever, it's like a personality trait. I never buy into anything wholesale. I've noticed that people get scared off. They're like, I'm scared by like the religious fervor of people in Agile. I'm like, yeah, I am too. So we'll do that. Like, we'll pick the one thing about the methodology that's really awesome and do that. And we don't have to do any of the religious stuff. It's okay. You know, we can have a party without having to have it be a religious celebration. So that's kind of the approach.
Great, thanks.
So you made an intern joke in your talk, which I and other interns here probably appreciated, but
Love my intern.
I was hoping you could sort of speak to us who are sort of here for 12 weeks, certainly not in a management position, kind of thrown into one, you know, little nest like part of the code base. Like, how can we, you know, over our internship sort of, you know, be as effective as we can in what we're tasked with, and also, you know, like you said, grow in your own job?
Okay, so I think the key things I would try to get out of an internship are, hopefully, I don't know if you get to choose your own project, whether it's defined for you, but hopefully it is something that you can talk about in the future and learn something from. So first thing is learn something, second thing is have something you can talk about in job interviews. The second thing, and people, I think sometimes with interns is people get really focused on the code. We say interns are code monsters, right? They just produce and produce and produce. Like, just kind of stick your head up once in a while and say, what is good about the culture of Box? When I go to look for a job when I graduate, what are the things about my manager and the culture here that I like? What are the things that I don't like as much? Because when you do go to look for a job, technically hard is half of it, culture is the other half. So that's kind of my advice. Like, look at the management styles and cultural aspects that are things that appeal to you, if that makes sense. That's probably the most important thing. The other thing is network. Like, get to know as many people as you can, as many other interns as you can. The people that you meet at college and your internships are the people that are going to be giving you a job in 12 years' time, right? Relationships are the most important thing in having a good career. So, questions? Oh.
Yeah. Hello, this is Satya. So I had a question related to documentation. It's not something everybody's interested in putting their hands into. So what do you suggest as like an approach both at the engineering level and also at the business and product level?
It's a little hard to hear, sorry.
General approach to documentation at the engineering level and also at the business level, sort of team environment. What do you recommend as an approach for documentation?
It's a broad question. What do I recommend as an approach to documentation? Keep it lightweight. As I said, long documentation, nobody wants to write it, and definitely nobody will read it. Make it editable. Like, don't tie it up in a place where people can't fix it when it's broken. In a perfect world, your documentation should be in version control. And then, you know, that's probably the key things.
Hi, Lauren.
Hey.
So I work for a very small startup company, and we almost follow all the things for this guy.
Yay, that's great.
But still, sometimes I feel like the doing the sprints and too many iterations, startup online. For example, like if I'm given to build a cylindrical box, and in the first iteration, I would be told, it's okay if you build a cuboid or cube kind of box, and then we keep beating it in all the iterations until it becomes a spring, trying to smoothen the corners.
Okay.
So that's my feeling about the idea.
Okay, so
Not all the time, but sometimes I feel like that.
yeah. It is possible for short iterations. This kind of relates back to the guy's question, I can't see him now, which is that sometimes short iterations can lead you to a local minima. Or local optimum, I guess I mean. You know what I mean? Something that's kind of good, but overall you could do something better. And it's okay to throw something away and start over at some point. Then you replace it with V2, which you say like, oh, that's kind of a bad way to do this, let's do something else. And you start iterating on that. You're going to do that with everything anyway, all right? The architecture you start with is not the architecture you're going to have in 2 years' time, I guarantee you. So. one thing I know about startups. That's probably it. I'll hire up a little bit if anyone wants to chat. That's fine.
All right, so if you can help out, clean up some of your things. There's trash bins all around the walls. Otherwise, I'll have to clean it up personally. And let's thank Laura for being awesome.